I felt like some kid worked really, really hard, and I inherited all of his money, pretty much. Yeah.
Macaulay Culkin built his entire adult life around one idea: control. He survived an abusive father who turned him into a cash machine before he could tie his own shoes. He survived tabloids that declared him dead while he was still walking around New York buying groceries. He survived a friendship with Michael Jackson that dragged him into a courtroom at 24 to defend something he never asked to be part of. But in early 2026, something happened that didn't just hurt him. It broke him. A phone call came that pulled every carefully buried wound back to the surface. And for the first time in decades, the man who learned to joke his way out of anything went completely silent. This is not another story about a child star who crashed. This is about the one person who made him feel safe when the whole world was watching and what happened when she disappeared. Macaulay Carson Culkin was born August 26, 1980, in a cramped railroad apartment on New York's Upper East Side. There were 7 children total. Not enough beds. Not enough space. Barely enough money to keep the lights on. His mother, Patricia Brentrup, worked whatever jobs she could find. His father, Kit Culkin, had once been a stage actor with real talent and even bigger dreams. But those dreams never turned into the career he wanted, and that failure sat inside him like poison. By the time Macaulay was 4, Kit had decided his son would finish what he couldn't. The boy had a face people remembered. He stayed calm around adults. He didn't cry when the audition didn't go well. To his father, that looked like opportunity. So Macaulay started going to open calls across the city, sometimes 3 or 4 in a single day. He learned his lines. He hit his marks. He smiled when they told him to smile. And slowly, the work started coming. By age 6, he was already training at the School of American Ballet, performing in off-Broadway shows, and memorizing scripts while other kids were still learning to read chapter books. The apartment got a little quieter when he booked jobs. The tension eased. His paychecks, small at first, became something the family leaned on. And that's when childhood stopped being about play and started being about survival. Not his survival. Theirs. A boy became the provider. A son became the solution. And nobody stopped to ask what that was doing to him. In 1988, he got a small role in a John Hughes film called Uncle Buck. He played a smart-mouthed kid opposite John Candy, and he nailed it. The timing was perfect. The attitude was sharp. Hughes saw something in that performance that stuck with him. When he started writing a script about a boy accidentally left home alone at Christmas, he wrote it with Macaulay's face in mind. That decision changed everything. Home Alone opened in November 1990 on a modest budget and low expectations. Within days, it became a phenomenon. It stayed number 1 at the box office for 12 straight weeks. It played in theaters for months. It made over $470 million worldwide and turned a 10-year-old boy into one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. Suddenly, Macaulay Culkin wasn't just famous. He was everywhere. His scream, hands pressed to his cheeks, became the image of childhood fear and joy mixed together. It showed up on posters, lunchboxes, and magazine covers. He became the face of Christmas for an entire generation. What made the performance so memorable wasn't just the physical comedy. It was how real it felt. He played a kid who had been overlooked and forgotten and then discovered he was stronger than anyone thought. Audiences saw confidence wrapped in vulnerability, and it stuck. Behind the scenes, though, the work was harder than it looked. Joe Pesci stayed away from him between takes to keep the tension believable. During one rehearsal, Pesci bit him hard enough to leave a scar. But Macaulay kept showing up. He delivered every line. He hit every mark. And the film gave him something he would never escape, a permanent place in pop culture history. The money that followed changed everything, but not in the way most people think. For the first Home Alone, Macaulay earned around $100,000. A year later, his asking price had jumped into the millions. By the time Home Alone 2 arrived, he was commanding a percentage of the box office and became one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood regardless of age. But none of that money was really his. It sat in a trust controlled by his parents, and his father used that growing fortune as leverage in every negotiation. Kid Culkin pushed studios harder and harder. He demanded script approval. He wanted bigger trailers. He insisted on higher salaries. And if he didn't get what he wanted, he threatened to pull his son from projects entirely. What had started as a father managing a talented child had become something else. A business. One where the product was a boy who just wanted to stop working. From 1990 to 1994, Macaulay appeared in My Girl, Home Alone 2, The Good Son, The Nutcracker, Getting Even with Dad, and Richie Rich. He was on screen almost non-stop. My Girl showed she could handle emotion and loss. The Good Son pushed him into darker, more unsettling territory and confused audiences who still saw him as Kevin McAllister. Richie Rich tried to package him as a squeaky clean family star again, but by then the cracks were starting to show. He was tired. He was overworked. And the person pushing him the hardest was supposed to be protecting him. In 1995, at just 15 years old, Macaulay Culkin did something almost unheard of. He went to court and asked a judge to remove both of his parents from control of his money. He didn't side with his mother against his father. He didn't hand power to a relative. He wanted them both out. The trust tied to his career held somewhere between $15 and $17 million, and the legal battle that followed exposed just how twisted his home life had become. He later described his father as physically and mentally abusive. He talked about being forced to sleep on the couch during the peak of his fame. He said Kid used fear and threats to keep him working and that every break from acting felt like a betrayal. The court filing wasn't really about money. It was about survival. It was a teenager trying to take back control over a life that had been decided for him since he was 4 years old. After the case settled, Macaulay stopped acting almost entirely. He stepped away from Hollywood and didn't look back. For the first time in over a decade, he wasn't performing. He wasn't promoting. He wasn't standing in front of cameras being asked to smile. He was just trying to figure out who he was when nobody was watching. But walking away from fame didn't mean fame walked away from him. In September 2004, police in Oklahoma City pulled over a car with Macaulay riding as a passenger. When they searched his bag, they found 17.3 grams of marijuana, 8 clonazepam pills, and 16 alprazolam pills. He had no prescription. He was arrested, charged with misdemeanor drug possession, and released on a $4,000 bond. His mugshot went everywhere. The pale skin. The long hair. The tired eyes. It became the image tabloids used to tell a very specific story. The child star from Home Alone was now a cautionary tale. Over the next several years, that story only got worse. British and American tabloids started running claims that he was spending $6,000 a month on heroin. Most of those reports had no real sources, but they spread anyway. Then in February 2012, paparazzi photographed him in New York looking extremely thin. His face looked gaunt. His clothes hung loose. One outlet called him Skeleto, and within days, rumors started circulating that he had only months to live. There was no medical evidence. No hospital report. Just a bad photograph and a narrative that fit what people expected. For years, he said almost nothing. Then in 2020, he finally responded in a major interview with Esquire. He admitted he had used drugs and said he liked them. But he also made it clear the press had invented a version of his life that never existed. He wasn't dying. He wasn't spending thousands on heroin every month. He had simply stepped away from the system because he wanted to, not because he was too broken to keep going. He called the rumors insulting, and for the first time in years, he wasn't being described by a headline. He was describing himself. That same need to control his own story shaped everything that came after. Instead of chasing another big studio comeback, he leaned into projects that felt deliberately strange. In 2013, he formed a comedy band called the Pizza Underground that parodied Velvet Underground songs by turning all the lyrics into pizza jokes. They played tiny venues, used pizza boxes as percussion, and confused everyone who showed up expecting something serious. It was silly on purpose. But it also made a point. He wasn't waiting for Hollywood to give him permission to exist again. He was building his own weird corner and inviting people in on his terms. That approach carried into his acting choices too. In 2003, he returned to film in Party Monster, playing New York club promoter Michael Alig, a man eventually convicted of murder. The role was dark, chaotic, and as far from Kevin McAllister as he could possibly get. In 2004, he appeared in Saved, a sharp comedy about a Christian high school, playing a sarcastic kid in a wheelchair. Neither film became a major hit, but they did something more important. They reminded people he could actually act. Then came years of smaller, stranger projects. He showed up in low-budget indie films shot on iPhones. He did voice work on Robot Chicken. He appeared in Seth Green's Changeland in 2019. And in 2021, he joined American Horror Story Double Feature, playing a desperate sex worker and aspiring screenwriter in one of the most visually disturbing seasons the show had ever done. For viewers who hadn't followed him since the 90s, it was shocking. Here was the former child star, now in his 40s, covered in grime and trauma, giving a performance that had nothing to do with nostalgia. It proved something he had been trying to say for years. If he was going to come back, it would be because he chose to, not because someone decided it was time. While all of that was happening publicly, something quieter was happening in his personal life. In 2017, he met actress Brenda Song on the set of Changeland in Thailand. The relationship moved slowly and carefully, far from the spotlight. On April 5, 2021, they had their first son in Los Angeles and named him Dakota Song Culkin after Macaulay's sister who died in a car accident in 2008. Their second son arrived in late 2022. Macaulay started calling them his little three-man circus, and there was a warmth in that phrase that felt earned. He talked about using the word proud with his children because it was a word he rarely heard growing up. He said he wanted to give them the childhood he never had. One without fear. One without pressure. One where love didn't come with conditions. Fatherhood seemed to settle something in him. For the first time in decades, he wasn't running from his past. He was building something that felt like the opposite of it. And part of that rebuilding meant finally being able to look back at Home Alone without flinching. In interviews from 2023 and 2024, he talked about watching the movie with his sons and actually feeling proud. The film that had once represented everything complicated about his childhood was now just a Christmas movie he could share with his kids. On the set of Home Alone in 1990, there was one person who made the work feel less like a machine and more like something almost safe. Catherine O'Hara, who played his on-screen mother, kept close to him between takes. She ran lines with him. She made sure he had eaten. She checked that he was resting. While his real father was negotiating contracts and pushing for higher salaries, O'Hara was doing something simpler. She was being kind. That care stood out because it was so rare. Everyone else around him wanted something. His father wanted money. Directors wanted perfect takes. Studios wanted box office returns. But O'Hara just wanted to make sure a 10-year-old boy was okay. That bond continued through the 1992 sequel, and for Macaulay, it became linked to something he didn't have at home, a sense that an adult could be trusted. Over the years, whenever he talked about his childhood in the spotlight, he always came back to her. She represented the one corner of that world that still felt warm when he looked back. She was not just a co-star. She was a reminder that protection existed. In 2023, when Macaulay Culkin received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Catherine O'Hara was there to speak. By then, she had become beloved all over again for playing Moira Rose on Schitt's Creek, a role that won her an Emmy in 2020. But when she stood to give her speech, the image everyone focused on was still Kevin and his movie mother. Photos from 1990 sat beside their 2023 reunion. Over 30 years had passed, but the emotional thread was still visible. The bond had never actually broken. It had just been quiet, waiting in the background of both their lives. Then, on January 30, 2026, that thread snapped. Catherine O'Hara died in Los Angeles at age 71 from a pulmonary embolism, with rectal cancer listed as a contributing factor. News of her death spread around the world almost immediately, and the response was intense. Some people knew her from Schitt's Creek. Others remembered her from decades of comedy work. But for many, she was still Kevin's mom. That was the phrase in every headline. And it reminded everyone how closely her image was tied to one of the most deeply familial films ever made. Within hours, Macaulay posted a tribute on Instagram that made the loss feel painfully personal. He shared a photo from the early 90s beside one from their 2023 reunion. Then he began the caption with a single word, "Mama." It echoed the cry from Home Alone, but in that moment, it was no longer a movie line. It was a man mourning someone who had quietly filled a protective role at one of the most vulnerable points in his life. He wrote that he thought they had time. That he wanted more. That he had more to say. Later, in an interview published in May 2026, he said her death hit him pretty good. He admitted he felt there was unfinished business between them. He even said he felt he owed her a favor and disliked the idea of leaving a debt unpaid. The language was striking because it sounded less like someone talking about a former co-star and more like someone grieving a parent figure he believed he had somehow let down. That made the loss feel even deeper. It was not only grief for a person. It was grief mixed with memory, guilt, and the ache of a chance that would never come back. A few days after the news broke, photographers caught him leaving a talent agency in Beverly Hills. He wore a dark jacket, kept his head down, and moved toward a waiting car without stopping. For a man who had spent decades being watched, the silence in those pictures said everything. There was no joke for the cameras. No clever line to cut through the sadness. Just a quiet face and a lowered gaze. And finally, after all those years of control, he let the world see him break.